Hi, everyone. Welcome to Neurotalk. This is Neurotech at Berkeley's Zoom adapted series where we have awesome opportunities to chat with experts from academia and industry about really hot topics in neuroscience and neurotechnology. Once again, I'm your host, Emma Clark. And today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Rich Ivry, Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at UC Berkeley, and also the Principal Investigator at the Cognition and Action Laboratory. So thanks so much for being here today.
Sure.
I would love to start off by giving our viewers kind of a high-level overview of your work. So would you mind telling us a little bit about how your interest in neuroscience began and how you kind of came into studying cognitive action specifically?
Sure. Well, I guess I was aspiring athlete, but never all that successful at it. So that always had me interested in like why are some people more coordinated than others? So you could say that that got me interested in general in the motor control world. Um, and but more generally, I guess, as I got into it, I think it really becomes a broader topic, just mainly one about human performance, all aspects of human performance, because I think what does make that exceptional athlete probably doesn't have a lot to do with the body or to do with muscles, or certainly it's good to be tall to play basketball, but I think there's a lot about the mind that's really essential for what makes us be able to produce such beautifully skilled, elegant movements and so forth. Now, I actually don't really study elite performers. It might be fun to go in that direction at some point, but pretty early on in my career, I got interested in studying people with neurological disorders that affected the motor system. In particular, people might have a stroke or degeneration of the cerebellum, classically considered part of the central part of the brain for producing skilled movement, as well as individuals with Parkinson's disease, where the degeneration involves another subcortical part involved in the motor pathways, the basal ganglia. And studying patients has really been a career-long passion of mine. Just such a rich source of information.
Yeah, definitely. And something that really caught my eye, and I'm sure catches the eye of a lot of our viewers when looking into a lot of your research and projects, is the use of virtual reality technology to study movement in a different way in these artificial worlds. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about how that idea came about and how using that technology helps you conduct studies and find findings that are novel that you couldn't maybe do in a traditional in-person experiment?
Sure. I mean, we don't use super elaborate VR systems. We are starting one project that does ratchet things up to a much, one of these state-of-the-art VR systems. But we've used what I tend to call poor man's VR systems, very simple ones that basically allow you to perturb the feedback. And that's what's really great about the VR systems, is that, I can study how well I can make a simple reaching movement. Okay, I put a target out there, have the person reach to it, and I can measure how accurate they are at that.
Mhm.
But why do we sometimes miss? Well, most likely, like any system, there's noise in the system, and it's going to vary from trial to trial. But the way to really study something frequently is to perturb it, to give it a little kick and see how it recovers. And so a VR system allows you to do that. I can now put a person in a VR system, have them reach for an object, and they make the regular movement that they make, but I fiddle with the visual feedback. So now, instead of their hand going directly to where they think that's going, I now shift it off by, say, a couple of inches, or
Mhm.
we do it in terms of rotating the angular displacement. So now the person's making a systematic error, and we can look to see how does the system recover from that? How does it, I can create a simple learning situation. It might be one that's occurring explicitly where the person knows, I keep missing off to the right, I better adjust. But I can actually make very small perturbations there and see how the person corrects for that without even being aware of the changes. So the VR systems really allow you to perturb the normal world and
Mhm.
look to see how people adapted it. And the truth is, we think, that's happening all the time in your normal life. Every time you put on a heavy jacket because the temperature's, cold outside, you've now changed the demands on your motor system, and you're automatically constantly recalibrating things. So you're running in like VR like experiments all the time. You just don't
Yeah,
know.
definitely. That's a really interesting kind of connection to how these small changes in our sensory perception based on things that we don't even think about, like your example of a heavy jacket, can have these really big impacts. And that's, I think, a really fascinating way to kind of model that in a more controlled way through the VR. I also would love to hear more about, recently you in your lab put out a paper about web-based platforms for motor learning. And that, especially, you know, in the time of COVID-19, where we all are right now, we're talking over Zoom. A lot of things in science have been slowed down in terms of kind of in-person subject experiments. So how do you see kind of this type of technology either continuing in research even beyond the pandemic times, or how do you see it more as just a temporary adaptation that maybe creates different results than maybe in person, or really comparable ones, or like what's
Yeah.
kind of your take on the role that might play moving forward?
Well, in the social sciences, there's been, of course, a huge movement to online studies for, well over a decade now.
Mhm.
And, that's true in all sorts of social psychology experiments, also true in behavioral economics, right? Where I can present people with different choices. You can earn $10 or lose $1, or earn $50 or lose $10 type things.
Yeah.
And been proven to be, very powerful, and lots of people have run studies and shown that the data you get from these studies, tend to be quite comparable to what you see in the lab. And so provides an opportunity to test much more heterogeneous populations and increase their sample size. In the motor world, I think people had shied away from it because they just felt like, we need to really control the movement. We need to be working within a particular apparatus. If we do it online and we're studying someone reaching like movement, that means they're either going to be dragging their finger across a trackpad on a computer or moving a mouse. And those are going to be two radically different types of movements. We're not going to be able to control what limb they're even using.
Yeah.
So I think it hadn't really caught on well, but JT Sai in the, are we okay there?
Sorry, I'm having technology.
Oh,
obviously.
okay. Anyhow, a graduate student in the lab, JT Sai, really worked with a couple of undergraduates in building this online platform to say, let's test it systematically.
Mhm.
So it's not that complicated to build this. It's basically kind of the same code that we use in the lab, just have to,
Yeah.
get some information about the, the response device.
Mhm.
But, he's just, I think, published a preprint showing, taking like 3 or 4 classic motor learning studies and shown that the results look nearly identical to what you get from the lab. So do I think it's a temporary change? I don't. And it certainly hasn't slowed down the pace of research. It's accelerated it. I mean,
Yeah.
to put in perspective, our subject payments, so we pay people to participate in our studies. I think the budget during the pandemic used to be, pre-pandemic, about $1,000 a month. I think post-pandemic it's been $3,000 a month, because and maybe that's going to make people sloppy. They have an idea, oh, I'll just stick it online and I'll have 50 people run by tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
As opposed to in the lab, you're going to be downstairs, you're going to be testing people. It's a lot of labor investment. Maybe people are a little more careful. So we are aware of that possibility now and trying to make sure that we do think things through carefully and continue to pilot things before we run them. But it is a great way. I mean, you basically run an experiment and you have an idea and you have an answer the next day.
Yeah.
And again, I think they do say that, for one reason or another, about 25% of your participants aren't going to be usable data, that they're probably texting on their phone while they're doing your studies. You got to have little catches in there to make sure they're paying attention. But for the most part, it's been a great tool.
Yeah. And I would also imagine, I mean, people are at home these days. It's another activity to do. Take an hour out of your day. It's easier also than coming into the lab and having to do things, to just sit at your computer and take
Well, we
part.
developed it. We were actually heading in this direction, not for the motor part pre-pandemic, but for our patient research.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, you have a person who has mobility problems, say from cerebellar degeneration or Parkinson's disease. It's a huge effort for them to come into the lab. And so we were already thinking about, is there a way we could be doing some of our experiments there, not necessarily the motor ones, the ones looking more at cognitive changes in these individuals? Could we be doing them online? Because then the patients could do it at home. They tend to be a very enthusiastic audience, or give them something to do. We try to give them a lot of feedback about, why we're asking these questions. And it was a way to reach out to much bigger audience or bigger samples, because we can now, we've met people over the years at conferences and things where we might have 100 folks who are willing to be in our experiments, but if we have to bring them into the lab, there's only maybe 10 or 15 in the local area. But now we can test people around the country. And so we were really moving that way for the patient work pre-pandemic, just for those reasons.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely huge. I know we have only a couple more minutes here, but to shift a little bit, a large portion of our viewers are undergraduate students like myself, and also graduate students. So if you had any one or two pieces of advice for students really interested in cognitive science and neuroscience, and wanting to get involved, what would those be?
Well, let's see. There are 4 different faculty in psychology who teach sort of an overview of cognitive neuroscience. And they all have their own different styles there. But Bob Knight, Mark Desposito, Jack Allen, myself, and developmental variants taught by Sylvia Bungay and so forth. I know that Knight and Desposito, people just rave about their classes. They're both practicing neurologists, so they're gonna really draw on their expertise about patient work. Jack Allen's one of the masters of neuroimaging, so take his class, you're gonna really learn the state-of-the-art world from using just for brain imaging, which is revolutionized cognitive neuroscience. But of course, the thing people really want to do is avail yourself of the different opportunities on campus to get involved in research. A lot of people in psychology recruit through the URAP program at Berkeley. Make a pest of yourself, figure out how to get to office hours. I mean, I think in psych at one point they estimated that between 50 and 75% of our undergraduates get some research experience during their time here. So this is a big, giant university, and you're in giant classes, and it might feel quite impersonal, but it takes some initiative, and it doesn't always work out for everyone, but many people do find research opportunities. And then once you get in the lab, then a lot of it's on your shoulders. I mean, frequently they don't demand a lot of you. It might be fairly monotonous task, but if you start doing the reading and trying to go to lab meetings and so forth, you can get pretty deeply involved as an undergraduate here. And that's, of course, the most exciting way to get a sense of what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely. And then finally, just kind of a fun question we like to ask all of our guests is, if you could create the neurotechnology of your dreams, either to contribute to something personal or to your research efforts, what might that look like? Putting aside all the rules of science and feasibility and money.
Okay, so there's 2 general approaches, I would say. There's one that's about recording, measuring, and there's another about perturbing. And I already said, like, the VR world is the way I perturb the system. Studying people with brain injuries, another way to study perturbations in the system. And I would like to have a tool that, and there are these methods out there called non-invasive brain stimulation, where you can safely, transiently perturb the brain. And it's a wonderful way to test out hypotheses. I'm going to momentarily, it sounds science fiction, I'm going to momentarily mess up your frontal lobe and so forth. These methods tend to not be all that powerful. So to have a very powerful way to safely, that's important, safely perturb, deactivate one part of the brain versus another, or maybe even boost up the activity in one part of the brain versus another, and see how that affects behavior. That would be a tool that I'd love to play with for many years to come.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with Neurotalk today. We really loved having you and hearing about all of your insights about motor movement and research and all the great things that you and your lab are up to. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me there.
Yeah. All right. Stop the recording. It was fantastic talking to Dr. Rich Ivry today about how there is so much to be learned from current research about how neurotech is evolving and allowing us to make huge strides, even despite barriers that come up like pandemics.
Yeah, I really appreciate how Dr. Ivry actually shed a light on remote research during the pandemic and the long-term effects of this too. It makes me wonder about what research needs to be in person versus what doesn't. This is particularly interesting in the context of motor movement studies like Dr. Ivory's, which people might assume require more physical and in-person activities.
Looking forward, we are ecstatic to talk with Dr. Rafael Yuste, Director of the Neuro Rights Initiative at Columbia, to unpack the future of neurotechnology and its ethical and societal implications. So if you like this video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you're interested in hearing more about the latest within neuroscience and neurotechnology.
Feel free to comment below who you want to hear from next. Thanks for watching, y'all.